I'd just like to say thanks on behalf of the National Media Museum. Thanks everyone for coming. The project I'm about to talk about, hopefully this will kind of kickstart and kind of be a catalyst for a lot more of these kind of projects, a lot more of these kind of workshops and sessions, and kind of try and create the museum in Bradford, make it into a kind of a real centre for kind of digital technology and kind of internet studies and interesting and cool things that are going on, not just in Bradford but around the world. So the project is Life Online, which is a new pair of galleries we're about to open at the National Media Museum, set to launch March 2012 next year. And it's actually going to be two galleries, so one downstairs in the foyer, where the games lounge is, where the retro vintage games bit is at the moment. So we're completely reinventing that whole area. And that's going to be the kind of permanent history of the internet, as well as looking at kind of the internet today, kind of touching on that, and also kind of looking into future trends as well. So very ambitious in its kind of scope and the amount of content we want to put in there. And then we also have another gallery upstairs at the very top of the museum on level 7, which will be a temporary exhibition space which will rotate around at least every year and kind of bringing in new content that is kind of running alongside current themes. So yeah, where do we start with kind of creating a gallery about the internet? As Steve kind of alluded to, it's just such a massive topic. You've kind of got the technology, which is immensely detailed, the history of that kind of going back all the way to the 50s and the 60s, but then also the whole kind of social aspect that sits on top of it. And how do you link these two together? And then as soon as you start looking at social stories about the internet, where do you end and how can you contain that within a finite space? Also kind of trying to do something different and unique as well. There are computing galleries, which I'm sure you know about, and kind of internet galleries around the world, such as the Chicago Gallery, Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, the Boston Museum of Science, and our Bletchley Museum of Computing at Bletchley Park, the Codebreaker Museum, which has a fantastic little gallery all about the kind of history of British internet and NPL and Donald Davies. But they're all very technical, very much about the history of the hardware and the networks of computers and the connectivity. Don't really have anything about the social aspect of the internet. And then on the other hand, you've got things which are very dynamic, always changing, very fluid. Festivals like Ars Electronica over in Linz in Austria, and the ZKM Museum in Karlsruhe, which kind of deal more with digital art, kind of new themes, have fantastic conferences running alongside them. And what we want to do with Life Online is kind of meld the two together and kind of blend, so you've got the history and the kind of social aspect, and bring something new where you're kind of inviting the audience in to interact with the content, and the audience are not just passive voyeurs, they're participants with the content, and we can kind of create an archive of content, and the opening of the gallery really is just the start. So yeah, we kind of first started just by jotting down all the ideas and kind of just having a lot of talks and discussions. So here you can kind of see early sort of post-it notes about where you start with the technology and all the detail, and then one there at the top, real life stories, which then as soon as you start looking at that, where exactly do you end? So you've got all these fantastic stories about cyber stalking and cyber bullying and kind of people finding their long lost family members online, and people killing each other and suicide pacts and the dark web. It's just a scintillating, riveting area to kind of create a gallery about, but how exactly do we present those within the gallery in something that is only 180 square meters downstairs in the foyer. But then what we kind of did was then kind of map all the content together. Sorry, the text on this is really small. This is kind of a content map that I kind of made to kind of help kind of draw parallels between the different content and how all the technology and the social kind of aspects tied together, and kind of along a chronology to kind of map everything together and kind of make the links. So kind of more like making a giant website about the internet. But it kind of gives you a flavour of kind of the content that we want to include. So kind of starting in the 1950s and the rise of ARPA and ARPANET, the birth of ARPANET, kind of explaining all the people. And then alongside the bottom, you've kind of got all the different networks, all the kind of online communities and all the technology. So that's all there kind of running parallel to the story on top. So kind of the killer app of email, the rise of computing in the 80s and how that expanded the network. And then the birth of the World Wide Web, and kind of how that made the internet a lot more accessible and expanded it rapidly. And then one area there we were calling the cloud, but then realised that was just a terrible title, which kind of deals with the internet today, really, and kind of the internet going mainstream, and that kind of turning point of everyone getting online and it becoming just another integral tool as part of our lives, and everyone being online, life online. which is kind of what we hope to uncover within the level 7 space. And then new ideas as well, so kind of looking at future trends and how the internet is changing us and kind of innovative and interesting new projects. So when we've kind of mapped out all the content, what we've been doing is then kind of picking out the key messages. So when an audience member or a visitor comes to the gallery, what message do they take away? So we have an audience tester, Catherine, who I don't think is here tonight, but she's working alongside the project team, kind of testing all the content out with our target audiences, which are for the gallery, so it's families with children aged 10 and above, so slightly older than our kind of average audience member, and independent adults. So, who are media enthusiasts and know everything about the internet there is to know. And because it's such a new medium, there are so many people out there who know everything about the internet, but then there's also this massive divide of people who don't know where email came from, don't know its origin, and are kind of interested to find out more. So it has to work on multiple levels, and then we're kind of working on the interpretation. How can we get these massively complex ideas across to someone who doesn't know anything about the internet, but then also present something surprising and challenging and thought-provoking to someone who, is the head of Google. So yeah, we're trying to work on lots of different levels. And through our audience testing, we've kind of found out lots of different things. One of the interesting things is, people kind of fortunate for us is, they use email and they use Google all the time, but they know nothing about where it came from and its history. So we will be presenting a lot of those kind of case studies in the gallery. But then a lot of people already have kind of preconceptions about certain things about the internet because they are so common and familiar, particularly kind of browsers, the web, and the internet, and kind of the differences between the two. So if we have a text panel or a video or interactive about the importance of browsers, people don't really know what browsers are. They think that's just the internet, and we've got to try and explain why browsers are important in the history of the internet, and kind of always tying it back to the main story. As to its impact on how it moved the medium forward, and people also, one thing we wanted to do was kind of create a lot of drama and kind of intrigue and a sense of story within the gallery. So we started for a long time thinking we'd start with the Cold War in the 1950s and really kind of big up the kind of Cold War connections and the launch of the Sputnik satellite, but actually kind of go to town on kind of the public information films and kind of the advertising and the kind of propaganda, and kind of really go to town on the iconic imagery of the era. But then we found out that was just really confusing for a lot of people because they saw the Sputnik satellite or they saw Cold War propaganda, and they thought that somehow the satellite was the first node of the internet, or why they walked into a gallery about the Cold War when in itself this is a massively complex subject. They thought they were coming into a gallery about the internet. So all the time we're kind of trying to connect it to the context and the main story, and kind of then we realised we've got to go really with the kind of rise of computing and what computing was like in the 50s, and kind of looking at the story behind that, but kind of concentrating on the main theme. And then kind of a massive thing is how to keep the content up to date as well, which is another challenge we're thinking about it. And how do you present things to different audiences? So pornography is a massive driver in the internet, but how do we present that to sort of families and kids? So we are kind of working on that at the moment, and yeah, that should be interesting. And also, how do you present very common kind of everyday things like Facebook and Google in new and interesting ways and make them interesting? It's not just like doing a gallery about a toaster or something. It's about presenting it in interesting ways. So we're going to have lots of case studies. And one of the things people keep saying is how are you going to keep it up to date? I think Facebook, if you look at MySpace, for example, it's kind of, the audience is dwindling now and it's kind of part of web history, but it's always going to be a massive part of internet history. It kind of drove social networks forward and changed the way we kind of listened to music and changed the way that people heard about the latest bands. Similarly with Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg's always going to be one of the kind of youngest billionaires, in 2011. And it's always going to be a massive network that changed the way we connected to other people. So we just need to make sure we've got that built in so we can kind of add another notch on the timeline. And not just kind of have it end with Facebook and then not update it for 10 years and it's massively out of date. So when we're kind of looking at the interpretation of the story, also people don't read text in galleries as well, which is really annoying because it's so easy to write a good bit of text. So we're looking at all the different ways of interpretation: video, audio, interactive, both kind of touchscreen and also kind of mechanical, tangible interactives as well as a whole kind of lot of workshops and events running alongside it as well. But people do like people, which is fantastic. So we're very much going with kind of, the Vint Cerf and the Bob Kahn, kind of going at the story through them, rather than talking about the ins and outs of TCP IP and kind of lots of diagrams and lots of technical information, which, we will allude to why TCP IP is important, but kind of through the guise of Vint Cerf and kind of lots of great quotes. And a lot of these people, are very quotable and kind of really sum it up. So Vint Cerf, kind of in a nutshell, he kind of sums it up himself really well, kind of, if the internet is a city, then he kind of built the roads, how the data and how the information is transported around. So it's a way of relating it to people who don't know anything about the kind of evolution of the internet. So this is the plan of the gallery in the foyer. So the large kind of arching glass at the front is the main foyer. And then it's divided into 4 different areas. So it is chronologically laid out, starting with the origins of the internet, so it kind of being a private kind of academic military network, then it kind of breaking open and into the public in the kind of late 70s, early 80s through kind of bulletin boards and virtual networks and the rise of email, but still very much the kind of territory of the geeks, of people who knew what they were doing with bulletin board systems, in no way mainstream whatsoever. Before the birth of the web in the early 90s kind of did make it mainstream, and then through the turn of the millennium, it becoming a mainstream tool, and then new ideas at the end. Which I'll go on to talk about a little bit later. So these are a few visualizations of the area. All along the bottom of the gallery, in the floor, we're going to have a timeline of objects, so that will track all the kind of evolution of computing, all the way from kind of time-sharing terminals in the 50s to the rise of desktop computing and Apple and IBM and Amstrad in the 80s, all the way down to the latest mobile technology. And at the end, in new ideas, we don't just want to present kind of the iPad 2 or the iPad 3 and kind of turn it into another car phone warehouse. Actually, kind of show something that's new and interesting and people haven't seen before. So we're working with people like Google and Microsoft, and we also want to work with anyone who has got something to show really that is different. So kind of prototypes and experimental hardware and objects and trends and ideas that are kind of moving the medium forward. So the glass is also going to be blacked out on the right-hand side as well, which will change the sort of mood of the foyer dramatically. But that's obviously to kind of make it a more immersive space, and also because it is going to be quite screen heavy, so people can kind of really get into the content. And kind of just a few things that kind of we are thinking about. I can't really go into a lot of detail about the interactives. I've been told off by our press officer, but I can kind of allude to them stealthily. So before people even move into the gallery, before they even kind of begin on the story, we really want people to kind of reflect on how much the internet has changed their life. And we're in this kind of quite fortunate time period at the moment where you've got people who remember life before the internet, majority of their life without the internet, and are probably still, quite anti-internet. And then people who've grown up and it's just part of their life and they just see it like breathing air, really. So what we want to do is try and get those two audiences talking and kind of really provoke discussion and reflection within the gallery. So that'll kind of be one of the first sort of little points within the gallery. And then, as I said, we kind of were thinking about going down the kind of Cold War route, which will still be in there, but really looking at the rise of computing in the 50s. And each area we want to be really evocative of the era, so kind of advertising from the 50s and 60s in the first area, kind of making people aware of how big and cumbersome computers were like and why they needed to be networked remotely. And like I said, kind of using people as the kind of anchors of the story. So if you kind of pick one man as kind of father of the internet, I mean, there's lots of fathers of the internet, but I guess Licklider is kind of the grandfather. He's kind of the man who got it all the people in the room together. And he was a psychologist who actually saw the potential of computers and linking them together, and was instrumental in taking the money released into ARPA, into the research fund, the military research fund, and using it, instead of using it for nuclear weapons or computers that could predict the maneuvers of the Soviet Union, actually just networking, how you'd actually network them together, and actually time sharing and graphics and just improving computers. So he unleashed a lot of computing money for the evolution of computing and kind of got the ARPANET started, really. And then things like distributed networking and packet switching are obviously instrumental to the foundations of the internet and how the internet works today. And diagrams and text test really badly for how do we explain this. So these are going to be quite touchy-feely kind of interactives where you can play around and kind of break the network and break the nodes and see what happens and see the packets kind of going across the network. Also kind of basing the internet in geography and how it is physically realised around the world. It's, you know, when you see a diagram on the internet, it's often just a cloud with a few computers kind of connecting into the cloud, and we want to kind of demystify what exactly is in that cloud. So we're thinking of kind of an animated interactive where you can see the internet growing from 1969 all the way up to today, and how it is physically realised around the world through cables in the grounds and through satellites and through radio and all the different formats that the internet kind of comes into our devices. And then kind of moving through the 80s, like I said, we kind of want to use advertising, particularly with the rise of computing, to kind of really get the sort of sense of the era. So kind of presenting bulletin boards, kind of looking at the the culture of bulletin boards and looking at where spamming and trolling kind of came from. And we want to give people the opportunity to actually experience a text-based internet. Before then kind of moving on to the web and explaining the importance of the web, explaining the difference between the web and the internet, and the crucial thing that Tim Berners-Lee did was actually kind of making it free, and why kind of by making it open source, kind of how it exploded, and by having this dream of a universal information space. So, you know, Tim Berners-Lee is a crucial part of the story as well. Before then kind of moving into the internet today, and like I said, how do we present this in new and interesting ways? So using kind of lots of data visualization. I think you might have seen this map earlier on in the TED Talk. Someone stole my slide. But this is a map of all the Facebook connections around the world. So you can see parts of the internet, parts of the world are completely blacked out, like Russia, which has its own internet, and areas like North Africa, which, well, kind of the main body of Africa, which, you know, don't use Facebook that much. So kind of showing interesting data visualization and kind of lots of data streams coming into the gallery, always changing. You can interact through Twitter and through YouTube and kind of contribute to the content yourself as well. And we want to kind of get your reaction from the gallery. Sorry, I'm rushing a little bit now because I'm a little bit over on time. But yeah, kind of looking at that kind of tipping point of when the internet went from just being, you know, cyberspace or the information superhighway to just being another kind of way of being human, and kind of asking, are we ever really offline? Are we always online now? And kind of, you know, looking at where it is now, how it's just completely embedded and abroad within our everyday lives. And we also want a sort of giant wall of kind of AV, looking at all kind of internet memes and virals and kind of famous kind of web moments, but also kind of, you know, serious citizen journalistic moments that have kind of changed the web and changed the world and changed the way that we kind of serve media and the kind of community and culture that has grown up around the internet. So obviously this is another part which will need to be updated all the time. One thing you might have seen here are these kind of floating cuboids, which are going to be sort of giant projection units which you can interact with on the floor with these multi-touch terminals. And it will be kind of a 3D version of the web. I'll just mute that. So we'll be kind of bringing in, it won't just be our own curated content. We want to bring in YouTube and bring in Twitter and Wikipedia. So you can actually, you know, we'll point people towards websites that are kind of working in parallel to our story around the wars and through the interactive. So people can spend 5 minutes kind of delving into the content, or they can spend 3 hours in there kind of finding out something new and really kind of using the internet to power the gallery. So it's not just a kind of selectively curated story. So new ideas, which is where we need your help. This is the area gallery, which we want to, it'll be very flexible, very temporary, always kind of moving and changing. And we're looking for people, if you're working in academia or industry, to kind of come to us with ideas. And if you've got something, a new product that you want to show, then we'd be interested in showing it within the gallery. So my email's at the end if you all come and say hello later on, and we can talk about putting something in the gallery. And then the level 7 space upstairs, which is going to be fantastic. Which is being led by Sarah Crowther, who's upstairs, just up at the very top there. But yeah, this is going to be a new kind of gallery space in the museum, a very kind of blank canvas, really, which will be a temporary space, also an education space. So David Smith, who's also here, is leading a group of young people to work on a project that will run alongside Level 7. So if you have any friends or relatives who might be interested in working on the project, then there's something there that might be interesting. So this is a shot of the inside of the gallery. And the first Level 7 gallery, which will open at the same time in March 2012 next year, is going to be all about open source culture and the kind of art of collaboration and a celebration about how the internet has unleashed this potential, this kind of fountain of creativity. But then also looking at the threat to the neutrality of that medium. So we're working with a couple of artists at the moment who are coming up with some great ideas. And we have an open commission as well, which if you get your skates on, the deadline for that ends in 2 weeks. So we're looking for art proposals, people to build interactive content for the gallery. So if you go to nationalmediamuseum.org.uk/life online, you can find out more about the commission there, and that's my email. And the commission's also in partnership with Future Everything, deadline July 2011. So thank you. Hope that was on time. Thanks.